Good evening. I hope you're all doing well. We are learning Baruch Hashem, the final blot of Maseches Yevamos Daf Kufchav Beis. And we're starting three lines, from the bottom of Kufchav Aleph from a Beis at the two dots. We've been discussing the level of trust that we have in a goy to speak Mesiach Lefi Tumo. Mesiach Lefi Tumo, as a reminder, is when a goy speaks with no ulterior motives. He's making a passing comment, and sometimes that is acceptable in halacha to rely upon. And we're going to see a couple of gemaras like that. There was a non-Jew who said to a Jew, Kitol aspisa v'shadi l'chivoy b'shabta. You need to cut down this particular feed for animals and feed it to my animals on Shabbos, which is, of course, an Isser Doraisa. So the goy says to the Yid, you need to cut down this food for me. And if you don't, kitil nalach, I'm going to kill you, just like kitil leploni bar Yisrael, just like I killed another Jew. I asked someone to cook me a dish on Shabbos, and I killed him. So how do we treat that comment of the goy? He threatens person one with murder, and he says, just like I killed person two. So do we consider that to be Mesiach Lefi Tumo, yes or no? And the Gemara says, Shama debisu ve'asay lekame de'abaye. Then the person, not who was threatened, but the person who, while he was threatened, he learned that someone else was killed, that person's wife. So she went to Abaye and says, what should I do? Am I still married? Yes or no? So the Gemara says, Shahisa, they had to wait, turning to the top of Kuchav Beis, Amud Aleph, Tlasa Rigle, they had to wait for 3 regalim. Why did they have to wait for 3 regalim? So Rashi tells us on the top of the page, Dibur Hamaschel Tlasa Rigli, Talmidei Chachamim nikbatzim lishmoa drasha hilchos Pesach bepesach v'yisa shoeles mehem. That was one of the times that they asked questions. It doesn't mean that there were never. We know that Batei Din were common on Mondays and Thursdays, but apparently these kinds of shilas were of limited scope, and you could only ask certain people. So they didn't yet know the answer. You need to go ask Rav Yosef. His knife is very sharp. Obviously, a metaphor just indicating how sharp his mind was. So here's how Rav Yosef answered. They went in front of Rav Yosef and Pashat Mehamis Nisan, and they were able to determine whether or not our previous comment was Mesiach Lefi Tumo for a goy by saying, if you don't do what I asked you to do, I'm going to kill you just like I killed that person. Is that considered Mesiach Lefi Tumo for that other person? So he says it's not. Let's say that there was a non-Jew who was selling fruits in the marketplace. That if an Oved Kochavim, when he's trying to sell something in the market, if he says that these peros are orla, or if he says that they're azika, discussion about what azika is it a type of sweet fruit? Rashi seems to say that it's a location in Eretz Yisrael. Take a look at Rashi. Was that Rashi who said that? It wasn't Rashi who said it. Tosfos speaks about this a little bit. Either way, whatever azika is, it's some type of sweet fruit or a location. And if you want us to say it shall neter avai, the halacha is lo amar klum. We don't trust a goy at all, and therefore we don't trust him over there. We also don't trust him in the case of the threat. In which case, if a man says, "I'm going to kill you just like I killed somebody else," then that is not considered edus. Why is it that we don't trust this goy who's selling fruit in the shuk? Because he has a one-track mind. All he wants to do is make money, and therefore he's not trustworthy. It's not considered to be Mesiach Lefi Tumo. So let's find another case where maybe it was Mesiach Lefi Tumo. We're 8 lines down on Kufchav Beis Amud Aleph. Abba Yudin Ish Tzaidan Omar, this is a person, Ma'aseh b'Yisrael v'Oved Kochavim, a Jew and a non-Jew, Shahalchu b'derech, they were traveling together. Uba Oved Kochavim v'Amar, and the non-Jew said, seemingly Mesiach Lefi Tumo, in passing, Chaval al Yehudi shahaya imi baderech shemeis baderech, and he says, Nebuch, and the Jew who died while I was on a path with him, Ukvartiv, and I buried him. So he says to Jew number 1, I buried a Jew number 2. Before you showed up, I buried someone. The halacha is v'hisio ishto. That's considered Mesiach Lefi Tumo, and we do allow his wife to remarry based on that because there is no ulterior motive here. And as well, b'shuv ma'isa b'kolar shel b'nei adam. A kolar is a chabura, a collection of people. Shay mahalchan Antuchya. They were traveling to the city of Antuchya. And a non-Jew said, Amar, Chaval al kolar shel bnei Adam, I feel so terrible for what happened to this group of people, shemesu ukvartim. And there too, that comment of a goy is considered to be mesiach lefi tumo, and therefore, v'hisiu es neshosehen, the halacha was that all of the wives of those people were able to remarry. The Gemara continues with Shuv Maisa b'shishim b'nei Adam shahayu mahalchan lecharkom beitar. There were 60 people who were walking in this location. Upa'ovei kochav v'amar chaval al shishim b'nei Adam nebach on these 60 people shahayu mahalchan b'derech beitar shemesu v'kvartim. And he buried all 60 of them. V'hisios neshosehem. And the halacha is that all of them can remarry. So it seems as a conclusion from our Gemara that if we're able to prove, if we're able to really clearly show that the comment of a goy is really mesiach lefi tumo, then the halacha is that he has ne'emanos, or it's not so much that he has ne'emanos because he can't really be an aid, but his words have value because it's innocent. In fact, we rely on the principle of mesiach lefi tumo by a goy all the time in kashrus. There are a number of principles that we rely upon to trust a goy who may own a business to say that a food is kosher or not kosher. One of them is mesiach lefi tumo. Another is no mari umnase, that let's say, for example, the famed discussion about Oreos. Are Oreos, the regular single Oreos, are those considered milchik? It says OUD on the container. I actually called Nabisco myself once to test the system. And I said, if a person is deathly allergic to milk, is there any risk in them eating Oreos? Now, this person's a goy. What kind of edus do they have? That doesn't work. And it's also not mesiach lefi tumo because they have a motivation for me to continue buying their products. At the same time, there's something that offsets that risk, which is that umano marium nase, that they don't want to ruin their business. And if, God forbid, a person would have a negative reaction to an allergen in their food, that would be a big problem. So the person on the phone said to me that there is no milk product whatsoever in there. It's just made in a facility that has milk. So halacha l'maaseh, that's why there are those who eat Oreos when they're otherwise fleshik. You shouldn't eat them together because it's made in the plant that way. But Ladina should be fine. It's not a good protocol to advertise to people that things that are OUD are not necessarily actually dairy, because people who may not know the difference may not know how to apply those halachos. But this is just an example of some of the halachos. That brings us to a new Mishnah. Not quite the last Mishnah, just three left, it seems. Yeah, 3 Mishnahs left, and then we'll be done with the Perek, we'll be done with the Maseches. The new Mishnah reads 1/3 of the way down. Me'idim la'or haner u'la'or halavana. We're allowed to give testimony about a person's death using a candle or using moonlight. Doesn't have to be during the day. Umesian al pi baskol, and we're also allowed to allow a woman to marry based on a baskol. This isn't your classical baskol like we're used to hearing, because we know that we don't paskin from a baskol. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi's almost halfway down. The first one on this new Mishnah. Dibur hamaskol al pi baskol shamu kol tzoekes ploni meis v'lo ro adam b'tzalmo. We heard a person call out saying Ploni Almoni died, but we didn't see the person talking. So that's what this case of baskol means. Ma'asav echad, the Mishnah continues. There was a story about a man, Shaman al Rosh Hahar. He was standing on a mountain. Amar, and he said, Ish Ploni ben Ploni mimakom Ploni meis. He said, Ploni Almoni from the city of X, that person died. And halchu, they went to go see who was talking. They couldn't find him. Lo matzu shamadam. And halacha is v'sio esishta. They allowed for the marriage to happen. We assume that person was speaking with integrity. And as well, V'shuv ma'aseh b'tzalmon be'echad she'amar ani ish Ploni ben ish Ploni. A man says his name. He says Ploni ben Almoni, and Nashcheni Nachashi was bit by a snake, and he knew he was going to die. V'harei ani meis v'halcha v'lo hikiruhu, and they went to go look at him. They didn't know who he was. V'halchu v'hisio es ishta. Didn't matter. We allow for that woman to remarry under those circumstances. Amar Rabba bar Shmuel. Let's analyze this Mishnah. Rabbi Shmuel says, Tana, Beis Shammai omrim, ein masian al pi baskol, Beis Hillel omrim masian al pi baskol. We see that there's a machlokas, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, about this topic, whereas our Mishnah presented it as a davar pashut. So it says the Gemara, Maika mashmalan. Why are there 2 Mari Makomos here? We don't need both Mari Makomos. We either need our Mishnah that's written stam, or we can have the Mishnah Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, where we know we paskin like Beis Hillel. But why do we have to have multiple Mishnayos? Says the Gemara, because I didn't want you to misunderstand. My kamashmalan must nisin. The Gemara responds 3 lines into the wide lines. Hakamashmalan de'i mishtakachas stama. That if a person would in fact find a stam Mishnah that would side with Beis Shammai, de'ein masian Beis Shammai, that would be Beis Shammai, and we don't paskin like him. Two dots. The Gemara says, "V'halchu v'lo matzo." We said that there was a person who called out on the mountain and we weren't able to find him, and we said that a man could marry based on that. The Gemara posits, "V'dilma shade hava." Maybe the person that that had called out wasn't really a person. Maybe it was a shade. It was a demon. So says the Gemara, "Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amarav she ra'ulo demus adam." It seemed that the shade, that this demon actually had the shape of a body. Says the Gemara, that's not surprising. Inhu nami damo. They look like people. They're just shaded. They have the shape of a body. Says the Gemara, that's not. It's not true that they're exactly like people. The chazu lo bavoa, because we saw that there was a shadow and a shade. It doesn't have a shadow. Says the Gemara, that's not true. 2/3 of the way down. Inhu nami islahu bavoa. A demon also has a shadow. Says the Gemara, the chazu le bavoa de bavoa. A person had a double shadow. Lights coming in different directions can cause for two shadows. That's only true for people, and it's not true for shadim. Says the Gemara, v'dilma lididhu islahu bavoa bavoa. That maybe there was in fact by shadim two shadows. Says the Gemara, it's not correct. Amar Reb Chanina, Amar li Yonasan Shida. Yonasan Shida was either a shade or he was an expert in shadim, one of the two. And what did he say? Bavoa islahu. When it comes to a demon, we assume that they do have a shadow. However, bavoa de bavoa, a double shadow less lahu. And therefore the Gemara says that it must be that it was not a shade and it was a person. Says the Gemara, the dilma tzara havoi. Maybe it was a comment that was made by the tzara or some type of ruse that was built by the tzara to ruin that wife. Says the Gemara, Tana de Rabbi Shmuel b'shasa sakana kosvin v'nosnen afal pish ein makir. If there's a shas sakana, if there's something going on, then we are allowed to trust this voice, even though we are not able to see who it is. And that is how the Gemara concludes over here. That brings us to the second to last mission in the parak, also 2/3 of the way down, and it's a quote that we've seen before already. Amar Rabbi Akiva, K'sherati leNaharda la'aber hashana. When Rabbi Akiva was traveling to Naharda in order to help them with all of the mathematics of building an Iber, of adding another month to a Jewish calendar, Matzasi Nehemiah ish beis Dali. I found this person Nehemiah. Amar li, Nehemiah said to me, to Rabbi Akiva, Shamati she'ein masiyana seisha be'eretz Yisrael al pi eid echad ela Yehuda ben Bava. I understand that you only have one shita lekula, and that's the shita of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. What did Rabbi Akiva say back to him? V'nomi lo kenadvar. You're correct. Only Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava agrees to that. Amar li, he says to him, Emor lahem mishmi. I want you to say in my name. I want you to say the following. Atem yodem shamedina meshubeshes begaisos. You should know the country that I live in is a pretty crazy place. And mekublani mi Rabban Gamliel hazaken. I understand from Rabbi Gamliel hazaken shemasin es isha al pi eid echad, that we are allowed to allow a woman to marry based on the edus of one person. And when, says this person, that he presented this information to Rabban Gamliel, samach lidvari v'amar matzanu chaver Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is no longer alone in his psak that a woman can remarry al pi eid echad. Mitoch hadavar, while they were discussing this, Nizkar Rabban Gamliel was reminded of a story, shenehergu harugim betel arza, that people were killed in a location called Tel Arza. V'hisi Rabban Gamliel nishosen al pi eid echad, and he remembered a case where there was a psak accordingly, where a psak came out that women could remarry based on the edus of one person. Rabbi Kiva Omer, I disagree. Sorry, I think I skipped a line. I did. And the Gemara says, and then they decided that a woman can remarry based on aid mipi aid, one witness from another, mipi eved, mipi isha, mipi shivcha, a very, very broad leniency. Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yeshua wanted to tighten the bow a little bit. That was a little too much. Omrim ein masian es isha al pi eid echad. It's not correct, but maybe some of the others are allowed to give edus. Rabbi Akiva Omer lo al pi isha, v'lo al pi eved, v'lo al pi shivcha, v'lo al pi krovim. A very limited scope of leniency. Doesn't really allow for any of these things to take place. Says the Gemara, v'sava Rabbi Akiva al pi isha lo. Does Rabbi Akiva really hold al pi isha that a woman is not allowed to give edus, eid echad, to free up to get married? Says the Gemara, after all, v'hatanya, we have a complex brisa over here, which says as follows. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Mishum Rabbi Akiva, in the name of Rabbi Akiva, it was said as follows. Isha ne'emenes lahavi gita mi kal v'chomer. A woman is ne'emenes to say that a get was brought from the following kal v'chomer. Uma nashim she'amru chachamim Ein ne'emanos lomar meis baila, ne'emanos lahavigitehen. Just like a woman, the Chachamim said she's not ne'eman to say that a husband dies, but she is to say that she got a get. Zo shene'emenes lomar meis baila, then one who is trusted to say that that her husband died. Eino din shene'emenes lahavigita. And from this kal v'chomer, the Gemara infers, Nashim sha'amru chachamim hu delo mehemne. It's only the woman herself who's problematic, but a general woman, isha be'alma, the edus of a woman who isn't nogea b'davar, she's not a tzara, she's not the woman herself, she's just a passerby, and she knows that the woman should be able to get married. Absolutely. Mehemna. So says the Gemara that Rabbi Akiva seems to be soser himself from our Mishnah to this Mishnah, this brisa that's quoted in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, Lo kasha, don't worry. Kan kodem shechaziku, kan la'achar shechaziku. Our Mishnah, where it says that he's strict, that's after he changed his mind. But in the brisa, where he was more lenient, that was before he changed his mind. So it's okay that Rabbi Akiva has two different shitas. His shita was developing, and it ended up being written down in both forms. Final Mishnah of the Masechta. Amru lo, they said to him, Ma'aseh b'vnei Levi shahalchu l'tzar ir hatmarim. Bnei Levi went to this place of Tzar, which was the city of Tamarim of date trees. V'chala echad mehen, there was someone who got sick from the Bnei Levi. V'aviu bepundak, and they put him in an inn, in a place to recover. And they left him there, and they went to go do whatever they needed to do. He was holding down the travel, so fine. Says the Gemara, then they were coming back on their way home, and Amr lepundakis ayei chavereinu. They went back, they saw the innkeeper standing outside, whatever she was doing, they saw her, and they said, where's our friend? And she said, I'm really sorry. Numis, she responded, Numis lahem meis ukvartiv, he died, unfortunately, and I buried him. Halacha is v'sius ishto. We trust her opinion enough to allow that man who died that his wife should remarry. Says the Gemara, "Velo tehei kohenes kipundakis." Shouldn't it be that a regular Yiddish girl? Rashi here highlights that it's lav dafka kohenes. It's any Jewish girl. Shouldn't she be just as strong as a pundakis? We have all these shitas in the previous Mishnah. Do we trust a woman? Do we not trust her? We trust a pundakis. She's a goy. So if we trust her, why can't we trust a Yid? So says the Gemara, Amar lahu, he said back to them, that's great. If you want to say if she was as detailed as the pundakis was, then I would definitely agree with you. Why? What did the pundakis do that was indicative of ne'emanus? So says the Gemara, she had all of his garments, she had a sefer Torah that he was carrying with him, and therefore she had ne'emanus. In other words, it wasn't so much about edus, it was just about she brought evidence, and the evidence itself was pretty clear that that was the case. Final turn of the page. We are on the top of Kufchav Beis, Amud Beis. Baruch Hashem, the final Amud of the Masechta. My grius of the pundakis. Why is it that the pundakis is considered lower than the Jew in this particular case? It was implied that way in the Mishnah. Amar of Kahana pundakis ovedas kochavim haisa, umesicha lefi toma haisa. She was mesiach lefi tuma. She was just responding to a conversation. And says the Gemara, what she had said was, as quoted in the Mishnah, zeh makalo v'zeh tarmilo v'zeh kever shekavartiv bo. This actually quotes things a little different than our Mishnah. This is his walking stick, this is his coat, and here is the place where I buried him. That what was the case over here? Why is the pundakis different than the Jew? Pundakis ovedas kochavim haisa. It's just that she was umesiach lefi tuma haisa zeh makalo v'zeh tarmilo v'zeh kever shekvartiv bo. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. V'ha'ayeh chavereinu ka'amar le. She wasn't really Mesiach Lefi Tumo, asks the Gemara. They started the conversation. They said, where's our friend? And maybe instantly in her head, she was angling to try and say something that would be difficult for the Jews. So maybe it really wasn't Mesiach Lefi Tumo. Says the Gemara, that's not really what happened. Here's what happened. Kevan dechazitinu, when she saw them walking up to the inn, Bachya, she started crying. Amar le ayeh chavereinu. And then once they saw her crying, then they said, uh-oh, where's our friend? And only then did she respond, Amar lahem mesu kvartiv. So that is considered mesiach lefi tumo. The Gemara leaves an implication that if the conversation was started by a Jew, and then the goy was mesiach lefi tumo, that it's different than if she first was the one who reacted to something and really only purely shared her feelings that way. Tanu Rabbanon, we're about 10 lines down on Kufchav Beis and Beis. The rabbis taught us in a brisa. A man wanted to give testimony about a woman in front of Rabbi Tarfon. Amar lo b'ni he'ach ata yodeh be'edus isha zu. So Rabbi Tarfon says to the aide, how do you know about your testimony? Amar ani v'hu, me and this woman's husband, haynu holchim baderech. V'radaf acharenu guys. And there was some troops, some bad guys who were chasing us. V'nitla b'yichur shel zayis. And he grabbed onto the branch of an olive tree, upashchu, and he tore it off. V'hichzer es hagayis lachor, and he kind of used it as a bat to just swinging it at the enemies to push them back. And after the people were too scared, after the guys was too scared, they ran away. So then I said back to this woman's husband, Amarti lo, Aryeh, you are a lion. Yasher kochacha, which is of course the right way to say yasher koch, but no one should ever talk that way, socially off. But the word is yasher kochacha. Fine, he says, great job. Amar lo, the guy says, how'd you know my name? My name's actually Aryeh. That's what they call me in my city. Yochanan b'ribi Yehonasan Aryeh, demikfar shichya. That's what my name is. They call me Yonasan b'ribi Yehonasan Aryeh. And he's from the community of Shechya. Liyamim, just a couple of days later, chala umeis, this person got sick and died. And because we knew who he was, we knew his name, and we knew that he was alive at one point, and now they're saying about him that he died. V'hisi Rabbi Tarfon es ishto, that his wife was allowed to remarry. Asks the Gemara for the final halachic sugya. And this was a question that my father asked a couple of weeks ago, and I said we'd get to it, and here we are, is as to whether or not we need to push and challenge the Eidim. How much do we have to challenge the Eidim to verify their story? Says the Gemara, we're halfway down a little bit more, 4 lines into the middle width lines of Kufchav Beis, Amud Beis. Rabbi Tarfon lo bai drisha v'chakira. Don't you require an analysis? Don't you have to interview and question and grill the witnesses to see that they're actually making any sense? Says the Gemara, v'hatanya, after all, Maisa be'adam echad sheba lifnei Rabbi Tarfon leheid edus isha, and Amar lo, he said, Tim b'ni he'achatayo de edus zu, and Amar lo ani v'hu hayuhoch, and he repeats the whole story. This is drisha v'chakira. We're walking on the path. V'radav acharenu gayis v'nitla bichor te'ena, and this time it was a different tree, it's a fig tree. Upashchu, he tore off some wood. V'yichzer es hagayis lachor v'amarti lo yasher kochacha Aryeh, and he says, wow, good, you got my name right. Amar lo yafa kivanti l'shmi shekach koren osi b'iri Yochanan ben Yonasan Aryeh to Mikfar Shechya. And then the story continues, Liyamim Chala Umeis. And Amar lo kach amarti l'Reb Yochanan ben Yonasan de Mikfar Shechya Aryeh. Wasn't he from the city of Aryeh and not from the city of from the other city that was mentioned earlier, from the city of Kfar Shechya? Says the Gemara. Amar, he says back to Rabbi Tarfon, no, lo elakacha martilach. His name was Yochanan ben Yehonasan Aryeh de Kfar Shechya. The diktek alav shnayim u'shlosha pa'amim. He pushed him. Rabbi Tarfon pushed him a few times. And when Rabbi Tarfon pushed him a few times, he ended up saying the same thing over and over again, which therefore makes him trustworthy. That is drisha v'chakira. And says the Gemara, if that's true that there's drisha v'chakira, and then the hisi Rabbi Tarfon is ishto, so how can we ever say that Rabbi Tarfon doesn't require drisha v'chakira? It seems that he does from this story, because he asked him so many times, what was the guy's name? Tell me the story again and again. And then says the Gemara, you're right. Really, the discussion of drisha v'chakira, the standard by which we trust an aid, it really does require drisha v'chakira, according to some. Tanaihi, it's a machlokas Tanai. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, Ein bodkin eidei nashim bedrisha v'chakira divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that when we are analyzing eidei nashim, the eidim for a woman to remarry, we do not need drisha v'chakira. Rabbi Tarfon omer bodkin. And what is their machlokes about? V'kamiflagei b'dereb Chanina. As to why it is that there's a machlokes about needing drisha v'chakira, that depends on another machlokes. The Amar Rabbi Chanina, Davar Torah, Echad Dine Mamanis V'Echad Dine Nefashos B'Drisha V'Chakira. Really, when we're dealing with things that are financial, or we're dealing, of course, with things that are Dine Nefashos, then we need to fully interview and interrogate the witnesses. Shneimar Mishpat Echad Yelachem, that everybody has to have one din and everyone has to be analyzed properly. Umatam Amru Dine Mamanis Ein Srichen Drisha V'Chakira. But the Chachamim said their own leniency is that when it comes to Dinei Mamanis, the Chachamim, they said you really don't need to do Drisha v'Chakira, even though technically it's required Ladina. But they were very makel to allow it. Why were the Chachamim very lenient? Because if we were ever so strict with the edus of Dine Mamanis, then Shalotino Delas Bifnei Lovin, then people wouldn't lend out money anymore. It's so hard to lend out money. Everyone's going to come with edus, and the people are going to lose out. The lenders are going to lose, and that's not worth it to them. They're just going to stop lending out money. What's the machlokes? Mar Savar Kevan de Ika Ksuba Lemishkal. When it comes to our case, as to whether or not, when it comes to Edus Isha, if we do Drisha Vechakira, according to the first approach, since there's the Ksuba, that's Kedine Mamanistami. Because we're talking about something that has a Ksuba, there is a contract with financial aspects to it, which is the Ksuba itself, the Masayim Zuz. So therefore, we treat the Ksuba like Dine Mamanis. And the Chachamim were lenient by Dine Mamanis, but Shalotino Delas Bifnei Lovin, so that people who are lending money would not be hesitant to lend money. However, Umar Savar, 2 lines from the bottom of the page, Umar Savar, Kevin the Kasharina Neshes Ishla Alma, Kidin and Nefashos Tami. Oh, so there's a fundamental chakira. Do we say we need drisha by chakira? Do we need to interrogate witnesses when it comes to Edom who are trying to enable a woman to marry? It depends. Do we look at that at a woman's relationship as it relates to her ksuba and its dine mamanis, in which case there's no need for drisha chakira? Or do we say no, we are dealing with dine kares, dine skila, dine hereg, and sreifa, whatever the consequences would be for inappropriate relationships, and therefore it's dine nefashos, and therefore we do need drisha chakira. That's the machlokas between them. Yes. And then, of course, the Gemara concludes with a well-known piece of Gemara at the end of a number of Masechtas, the very last line of Maseches Yevamos, Shechianu v'kiyamanu b'giyanu lazman hazeh, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam, shene'amar v'chol banayich limudei Hashem, v'rav shalom banayich. The people who are Talmidei Chachamim, the students of the wise, they bring more peace into the world. And the Gemara quotes a pasuk to support this. According to some of the Meforshim and the Tfusim here, it actually should have the whole drasha, Al tikri banayich ela bonayich, like we see in other Masechtas and Maseches Megillah, and in some other ones as well. Actually, brachos, krisus, Tamid and Nazir, all of them do speak with this language at the end of the Masechta. Hadron Alacha Isha Basra, Uslikala Maseches Yevamos. Mazel Tov to everyone for finishing this beautiful, complex, sophisticated Masechta. Yiratzon, that we should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Mazel Tov.
Yashkoach, Yashkoach.